What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
I remember that evening with a clarity that still sends a shiver down my spine even now, as if the ordinary details of my suburban life in Columbus, Ohio, had been building toward this moment of quiet invasion all along. The kind of Tuesday in late October where the air carried the crisp bite of falling leaves turning rusty red outside my two-story colonial home. The very place I had purchased outright after my divorce 5 years earlier through endless real estate showings and mortgage battles. That left me fiercely protective of every inch of space within its walls. Settling into my worn recliner after a day of peddling properties to families chasing their slice of the American dream, I reached for a glass of inexpensive Merlot from the side table, the liquid warming my throat as I scrolled through tomorrow's listings on my tablet, only for my phone to vibrate insistently against the armrest, illuminating with the name of my younger brother Mike, the one whom our mother Evelyn had always treated as the favored son, the golden child who could do no wrong in her eyes despite his string of failed ventures and casual attitudes toward responsibility. Answering the call with a mix of habitual affection and the wariness honed from years of his occasional pleas for financial help or life advice, I expected nothing more than his usual rambling about a new job prospect or a borrowed tool he promised to return. But instead, he delivered the news as casually as if discussing the weekend's football scores, announcing that he and his wife Lisa, along with their two rambunctious children, would be moving in come Friday, because Mom had assured him I would understand the necessity given the extra rooms in my house and the tightening finances squeezing their current rental situation. The words hung in the air like smoke from an unexpected fire, turning the Merlot sour on my tongue as I processed the audacity. This wasn't some temporary couch-surfing arrangement among siblings as portrayed in those feel-good family comedies, but a full-scale takeover of the sanctuary I had built single-handedly after Dad's passing scattered our family's fragile stability. And the vague comments Mom had made over the past month about needing more support from me suddenly reshaped into deliberate groundwork laid, without my consent or conversation. Laughing at first in disbelief, a nervous sound that masked the tightening knot of uncertainty forming deep in my stomach, I probed for clarification, asking if this was some elaborate prank tied to her potential sale of the old family property upstate, or perhaps a misunderstanding about my guest room's availability for a short stay. Yet Mike pressed on with logistical details, mentioning the U-Haul reservation for noon on Friday and his assumption that I would simply rearrange my schedule to accommodate their arrival, as if my life and home were extensions of the familial obligations he had long taken for granted. By the time the call ended, my hands trembled slightly, not from outright fury but from this insidious doubt creeping in about whether my own blood relatives viewed me as a supportive sister or merely a convenient resource in their time of need, prompting me to rise from the recliner and pace the living room floor, my gaze drifting to the mantel lined with faded photographs capturing happier fragments of our past, like the one of Mike and me as wide-eyed kids grinning beside the sagging porch of our childhood home, with Mom standing proudly in the background as if her subtle favoritism toward him hadn't sown the seeds of resentment that now threatened to uproot my present. In that moment of reflection, the weight of how far we had drifted became palpable, transforming what should have been a simple family discussion into the first thread of a larger unraveling, and compelled by the growing unease, I picked up my phone once more. This time not to dial Mike back, but to open the security application I had installed the previous year following a rash of break-ins in our quiet neighborhood, the app's interface providing a false sense of security through its array of motion-activated cameras and real-time notifications that had so far kept the outside world at bay. The screen flickered to life in the dimming evening light, and there it was, a stark red alert pulsing across the display, intruder detected, timestamped mere minutes earlier from the backyard surveillance feed, causing my heart to pound with the ferocity of a sudden storm as I frantically swiped to access the video, revealing an indistinct figure navigating past the wooden fence with purposeful movements that ruled out any innocent wildlife foraging through the trash bins. Mere seconds after the alert, the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel echoed from outside, headlights piercing the curtains of my front window like probing searchlights. drawing into the driveway with an unhurried confidence that suggested familiarity rather than chance, leaving me rooted in place behind the sheer drapes, my breath shallow as I strained to identify the vehicle without exposing myself, whispering under my breath that this intrusion couldn't possibly connect to Mike's announcement, though a deeper intuition warned that family entanglements often manifested in the shadows when least anticipated. The engine idled with a low, ominous hum, casting elongated beams across the lawn, and I wrestled with the impulse to summon the police, weighing the risk of overreaction against the possibility that this was a misdelivered package or a neighbor's errant guest. Or, even more chillingly, a preliminary scout dispatched by Mike to assess the layout before their planned arrival, ultimately choosing to observe in silence until the lights abruptly extinguished and the car reversed away into the night, abandoning me to the enveloping darkness punctuated only by the app's persistent soft pings that echoed like unanswered accusations. Sleep proved elusive that night, my body twisting restlessly in sheets that now felt vulnerably thin against potential threats, and as dawn crept in, a steely determination solidified within me, transforming initial shock into the blueprint for retaliation that would remind them of the boundaries they sought to ignore. Refusing to yield passively to this casual encroachment, I booted up my laptop in the quiet morning hours, navigating to an anonymous browsing mode to research Mike's current address gleaned from a discreet scan of his social media profiles, uncovering a trail of neighbor complaints about their rental property's neglected state, complete with overgrown weeds encroaching on sidewalks and abandoned vehicles cluttering the yard in violation of local ordinances. With a calculated touch of mischief born from years of navigating tricky real estate deals, I submitted an anonymous report to the city's code enforcement office, phrasing it as a concerned citizen's observation to prompt an inspection without direct implication, and by mid-afternoon, a confirmatory email arrived detailing the scheduled visit, allowing me to envision Mike's inevitable scramble amid mounting fines and bureaucratic hassles. A clever and satisfying payback that elicited a wry smile despite the lingering dread, because if he believed he could insert himself into my life with such nonchalance, this subtle reminder would illustrate that personal territories defended themselves with unexpected sharpness. Yet as twilight descended once more, blanketing the neighborhood in deepening shadows, those same headlights reappeared on the street, maneuvering with deliberate slowness around the block as if mapping escape routes or testing my resolve, compelling me to clutch my phone with white-knuckled grip while the uncertainty swelled, hinting that my initial act of revenge might have ignited a chain reaction far more intricate and perilous than I had bargained for, leaving the night fraught with the promise of revelations yet to unfold. The morning after those persistent headlights had circled my block like a watchful sentinel unfolded with a fragile semblance of normalcy. Sunlight piercing through the half-drawn blinds of my kitchen in that subdued Ohio autumn glow that promised routine even as the undercurrents of the previous night's disturbances churned relentlessly in my mind, compelling me to brew an extra-strong pot of coffee whose bitter aroma filled the air while I replayed Mike's casual declaration and the security alert's eerie timing, each sip doing little to dissolve the residue of uncertainty that had settled over my home like an uninvited fog. As the steam rose from my mug, I couldn't suppress the urge to dial Mom's number any longer, the phone pressed to my ear amid the clatter of spoons against ceramic, her voice emerging after several rings with that familiar blend of frailty and unyielding maternal authority. Evelyn Thompson, at 72 years old, still wielding conversations like tools to shape outcomes in her favor, and when I broached the subject of Mike's moving announcement, she responded with a series of evasive hums and sighs that gradually unraveled into admissions of their mounting financial pressures, detailing how the costs of her assisted living had skyrocketed alongside Mike's recent layoff from the auto parts warehouse, painting a picture of desperation that positioned my spacious colonial as the logical solution for pulling the family through this rough patch. Her words carried an underlayer of expectation, implying that my single status and empty rooms made resistance not just impractical, but almost ungenerous, echoing the lifelong narrative where I, the steadfast daughter who had navigated divorce and career rebuilds without leaning on anyone, now faced judgment for prioritizing the independence I had so painstakingly earned over the collective needs of kin who had rarely reciprocated in kind. And as the conversation stretched, she let slip more about the family will, mentioning offhand consultations with her lawyer regarding equitable distributions that could encompass shared access to assets like my property. A revelation that twisted the knife of doubt deeper when juxtaposed against the forged email I had received the evening before. Its suspicious phrasing about inheritance adjustments arriving mid-call as a notification chime that pulled my attention away momentarily. Dismissing her gently with a promise to think it over despite the humor I injected by quipping about converting my dining room into a makeshift dormitory complete with air mattresses and rotating shifts for bathroom privileges, which elicited only a strained chuckle from her before the line went dead, I turned immediately to scrutinize the email on my phone. Its digital fingerprints revealing inconsistencies in the sender's domain and the attorney's signature that screamed fabrication, leading my suspicions straight to Mike's opportunistic tendencies, the same brother who had once borrowed Dad's vintage toolbox during our teens and returned it lighter by several valuable pieces, now potentially extending his light-fingered habits into cyberspace to grease the wheels of their impending takeover. The afternoon blurred into a series of client showings where I mechanically touted the virtues of curb appeal and open floor plans to prospective buyers immersed in their own pursuits of stability, yet my thoughts remained anchored to the encroaching family drama. The security app's intermittent false alerts throughout the day fraying my concentration like threads pulled from a fraying seam until evening descended, transforming the hallway's shadows into elongated sentinels that amplified every minor sound from the settling house. Determined to reclaim some agency amid the swelling uncertainty, I retreated to my home office after dinner, firing up the laptop to access a dormant throwaway social media account from my post-divorce era of anonymous venting. Navigating to Mike's public profile where his timeline brimmed with self-aggrandizing posts about entrepreneurial dreams interspersed with images of cluttered living spaces and half-finished home projects, providing the perfect canvas for my retaliation as I crafted a series of innocuous yet pointed comments under pseudonyms that amplified his portrayed laziness, sharing viral memes depicting perpetual procrastinators who aspired to greatness but settled for afternoon naps on sagging couches. The witty barbs landing with enough subtlety to circulate within his network without immediate traceability back to me, and within hours, his feed erupted with flustered replies and defensive justifications that I monitored from afar. A surge of satisfying levity washing over me at the thought of him squirming under the public spotlight of his own indolence, this light-hearted exposure serving as a vulgar nudge toward accountability without descending into outright confrontation. The small victory buoyed my spirits temporarily, allowing a moment of genuine amusement in envisioning Lisa's eye rolls at his expense, but the respite shattered around midnight when the security app blared to life once more. This time capturing high-definition footage from the front door camera of the knob twisting methodically as if by a hand familiar with the mechanism, my pulse accelerating into a frantic rhythm as I descended the stairs in stockinged feet. Phone in one hand and a heavy flashlight in the other, the beam slicing through the inky darkness to confirm the door remained bolted yet bearing a fresh slip of paper wedged beneath it. The handwriting mimicking Mom's looping script with an urgent message imploring me to relinquish control before complications arose that none of us could undo. Staring at the note in the harsh light, a fresh dilemma gripped me, torn between marching to Mike's rental for a face-to-face reckoning that risked escalating the familial rift irreparably or continuing this veiled warfare that isolated me further in my own home, a choice that undoubtedly would strike listeners as overly guarded or even paranoid, prioritizing suspicion over the bonds of blood that had weathered past storms. Yet the growing conflict demanded action beyond passive acceptance. As the night thickened outside, headlights materialized through the front window once again, not advancing into the driveway, but hovering at the curb with an insistent presence that suggested observation rather than approach, and in a surge of resolve, I activated the phone's voice recorder to document the scene, capturing the low rumble of the engine alongside my whispered narrations of the unfolding intrusion, the atmosphere charged with an impending retaliation that promised to upend the delicate balance we had all pretended to maintain, leaving me poised on the edge of discovery as the vehicle's outline blurred into the mist, the shadows in the hall whispering of threats that breached more than just doors. Dawn filtered through the frost-laced windows of my Columbus home with a deceptive gentleness that belied the turmoil still simmering from the night's shadowy encounter. The chill of the Ohio autumn morning seeping into my bones as I scraped a thin layer of ice from the windshield of my reliable sedan before heading to the real estate office. Yet, even as the engine warmed and I navigated the familiar streets lined with maple trees shedding their fiery leaves, the whispers from our family's tangled history began to surface unbidden, pulling me back to those long-ago summers at the weathered lake house upstate where Mom's favoritism toward Mike had first taken root like an invasive weed, always allowing him the prime spot by the dock for fishing while I, the dutiful older sister, ended up untangling lines or cleaning the catch, her subtle biases framing him as the carefree dreamer deserving of leeway and me as the reliable fixer who should simply accept the uneven distribution without complaint. Those memories, vivid in their injustice, intertwined with the note's plea from the previous evening, its scripted urgency echoing Mom's lifelong tactic of emotional leverage to steer family dynamics. And by the time I settled at my desk amid stacks of property listings and client files, the internal conflict intensified when my phone buzzed insistently with her number, her voice cracking over the line as she begged for a gesture of support, recounting in tearful detail how Mike's unemployment had plunged them into deeper debt and how my refusal to open the house felt like a personal betrayal after all the sacrifices she claimed to have made raising us through Dad's long illnesses and financial strains. Listening to her pleas, a profound dilemma gripped me, torn between the pull of blood ties that urged me to extend a hand despite the resentment built over decades of watching Mike skate through consequences while I shouldered the burdens, and the fierce protectiveness over the life I had reconstructed piece by piece after my marriage crumbled, a choice that manifested in my decision to sidestep her request with vague assurances of future talks rather than immediate capitulation, hanging up with a hollow promise that undoubtedly would strike those overhearing this tale as cold-hearted or excessively self-centered, prioritizing the sanctity of my hard-won solitude over the raw vulnerability of an aging parent whose health was visibly waning. The morning dragged on with viewings for eager homebuyers, each tour of sunlit kitchens and spacious backyards a stark reminder of the stability I refused to relinquish, but subtle clues continued to emerge, such as a cryptic text from an unrecognized number cautioning about watchful eyes in the neighborhood, prompting me to delve into archived family emails during a lunch break, where patterns of Mom's correspondences with our cousin Rita, the perennial meddler who thrived on stirring pots at holiday gatherings, revealed ongoing discussions about inheritance strategies that positioned Mike's needs above equitable shares, igniting a spark of resolve amid the uncertainty that demanded a countermeasure to disrupt their momentum. Channeling the wry humor that had sustained me through tougher times, I recalled Mike's boastful social media post about securing a moving company for Friday's relocation, and, with a touch of that light vulgarity in mentally dubbing him the king of half-baked plans, I placed a call to the outfit posing as a concerned family coordinator, weaving in fabricated details about a major road closure due to utility work along their intended route that would reroute them into hours of snarled traffic. The misinformation delivered with such plausible concern that the dispatcher logged it without question, allowing me to track the potential delay through public traffic apps later that afternoon and deriving a deep, witty satisfaction from the mental image of Mike trapped in a U-Haul convoy, fuming over his punctuality illusions shattered by my anonymous handiwork. This clever sabotage not only postponing their intrusion, but serving as a humorous payback for the entitlement he wore like a badge. As the workday waned and I returned home under gathering dusk clouds that amplified the atmosphere of impending confrontation, the house felt heavier with unresolved tensions, shadows lengthening across the hardwood floors like fingers reaching for secrets. And compelled by the need to arm myself with evidence, I pored over the security footage from the past several days on my laptop, isolating clips that captured recurring anomalies near the property's perimeter, the grainy images hinting at deliberate loitering that blurred the line between coincidence and calculation. The twist struck with chilling precision when I enhanced the audio from one particularly suspicious recording, a muffled conversation filtering through the microphone where a voice uttered my name in a tone laced with familiarity, its cadence unmistakably reminiscent of Rita's nasal drawl from countless Thanksgiving arguments, or perhaps even Lisa's under duress, forcing a reevaluation of alliances and planting seeds of doubt about whether the threats emanated from outsiders or insiders cloaked in relational trust. Dilemmas compounding as I debated escalating to law enforcement with this fragmented proof versus maintaining the solitary vigilance that increasingly isolated me from potential support networks. Injecting a sliver of levity into the solitude, I chuckled softly to myself about transforming my once peaceful abode into the set of a low-budget thriller where every cousin could be a suspect. But the amusement evaporated as headlights pierced the encroaching twilight once more, sweeping closer to the curb with purposeful intent, and the app triggered a live alert of motion at the side gate, the feed showing a figure slipping through the latch with practiced ease before the connection glitched, leaving me frozen in the living room with the door's distant creak reverberating through the walls, the growing conflict propelling me toward an edge where whispers from the past threatened to drown out the present's urgent warnings. The days following that unsettling intrusion at the side gate unfolded like fissures widening in the sturdy foundation of my Columbus home, each routine shattered by the relentless pressure of suspicions that shadowed me from dawn coffee rituals to late-night client follow-ups, transforming the once comforting familiarity of my two-story colonial into a labyrinth of potential pitfalls where every unfamiliar sound hinted at the family's coordinated advance toward Friday's deadline, the air thick with the scent of impending rain that mirrored the storm clouds gathering over our fractured relationships. Delving deeper into the forged email's origins during a hurried lunch at the office, I traced its digital trail to a public Wi-Fi hotspot mere blocks from Mom's assisted living facility. The discovery sending a jolt through me because it implicated not just Mike, but possibly Lisa or even Rita in a web of deceptions designed to erode my resistance, and when I mustered the courage to text Lisa directly with veiled questions about family paperwork, her reply came laced with feigned innocence that only heightened the dilemma, forcing me to confront the ethical tightrope of accusing a sister-in-law without irrefutable proof while the clock ticked inexorably toward their arrival, a choice that weighed the preservation of fragile peace against the risk of allowing their entitlement to solidify into occupation. Those weighing the story might view my subsequent decision as reckless or overly dramatic, yet compelled by the mounting evidence of boundary violations, I dialed the non-emergency police line under an alias borrowed from a past client, reporting vague concerns about unauthorized surveillance and potential trespassers circling my property to frame it as a community safety issue rather than a personal vendetta, but the backlash arrived swiftly in the form of a patrol car pulling up unannounced. That evening, the officer's skeptical gaze sweeping my living room as I downplayed the alerts to avoid sounding like the neighborhood eccentric, his parting advice to install better lighting leaving me flushed with embarrassment and a nagging sense that my anonymous plea had painted me as unhinged rather than vigilant, amplifying the isolation that came with defending one's domain single-handedly against kin who masked their ambitions in familial duty. By Thursday morning, the atmosphere crackled with escalating tensions as Mike's online rants about logistical setbacks from the traffic ruse filled my feed, his frustration boiling over into passive-aggressive jabs at ungrateful relatives. That confirmed my interventions had stung, yet the real surge came when I spotted his vehicle idling near the block during a quick errand, accompanied by Rita's unmistakable sedan, their hushed exchange visible through the windows suggesting a huddle of accomplices plotting the final push and seizing on the neighborhood block party I had co-organized months earlier as a community builder. I wove my revenge into the event's fabric with a mischievous precision honed from years of staging open houses, anonymously submitting raffle entries that linked Mike's name to comically apt prizes like a deluxe vacuum cleaner kit for the messiest mover or a subscription to organizational planners aimed at chronic procrastinators, the announcements delivered over the grill's smoke amid laughter from neighbors who had long whispered about his reputation, watching from afar as he accepted the gag awards with a forced grin that cracked into red-faced irritation, Lisa tugging at his sleeve while the kids squirmed in confusion. The witty humiliation spreading like wildfire through the crowd and providing a deeply satisfying catharsis in exposing their presumptuous chaos without a direct word from me. This light vulgarity in turning their invasion into public farce, reminding everyone that opportunists rarely escaped the mirror of their own reflections unscathed. The momentary triumph bought a fragile reprieve, allowing me to mingle briefly with acquaintances who shared knowing glances about family overreach. But as the party wound down under string lights flickering against the dusk, deeper cracks emerged when Mom called with a voice rasped by worsening coughs, her pleas for reconciliation laced with admissions of health decline that tugged at the guilt I'd buried, presenting a dilemma between rushing to her side and fortifying my home against the very relatives she championed, choices that underscored the growing conflict where loyalty to her legacy clashed with the autonomy I refused to surrender, and the twist unraveled later that night upon reviewing enhanced security logs. The footage disclosing Mike and Rita at a nearby notary's office earlier in the day, their hands exchanging a manila envelope whose contents I pieced together through a frantic online search of public records, revealing a tampered draft of Mom's will that inflated Mike's inheritance claims to include equity stakes in my property under vague family support clauses, the betrayal hitting like a structural beam giving way and compelling me to slip out under cover of darkness, detail them briefly from a safe distance, heart hammering against my ribs as I documented license plates and timestamps, pulling back only when paranoia warned of detection, the uncertainty swelling into a torrent that questioned every shared memory and alliance in our bloodline. Returning home with the weight of that evidence burning in my phone's gallery, I reinforced the locks and dimmed the lights, but the app's alert pierced the quiet around midnight, signaling motion not at the perimeter but within the house itself. The back door found ajar upon my cautious approach as if pried by an insider's knowledge, and sweeping the beam of my flashlight through the disarrayed study revealed drawers rifled and papers strewn across the floor, including photocopies of the forged will, bearing Mom's shaky but authentic marginal notes that begged for fairness, the direct threat now permeating the walls and leaving me barricaded in the master bedroom with the phone clutched like a lifeline, headlights flashing erratically through the curtains as if the reckoning had infiltrated not just the driveway, but the core of my carefully constructed world. Friday dawned with an unnatural hush enveloping my Columbus neighborhood, the gray skies overhead casting a pallor over the empty driveway that stretched before my two-story colonial like a blank canvas, awaiting the brushstrokes of inevitable confrontation. The weight of the accumulated tensions from forged documents and midnight intrusions pressing down as I stood at the kitchen window, with a mug of cooling coffee gripped tightly in my hands, reflecting on how years of solitary resilience after the divorce had fortified this home into an unassailable fortress now besieged by the very family ties that should have strengthened rather than strained it. The previous night's discovery of the ransacked study lingered like a fresh wound, the scattered papers including that damning draft will with Mom's handwritten annotations pleading for balance among her children. A poignant reminder of her fading influence amid health battles that Mike had exploited to justify his overreach, and as the morning hours ticked by without the anticipated rumble of a U-Haul, my mind replayed the cascade of choices that had led here, from anonymous tips to public embarrassments, each witty retaliation a shield against the entitlement that viewed my independence as negotiable, yet those overhearing this narrative might condemn my refusal to yield ground as the height of stubborn isolation, favoring the echo of an empty house over the messy warmth of reconciliation that blood demanded in times of crisis. Compelled by the forged will's implications, which public record searches confirmed as an unauthorized amendment pushing claims on my property under the guise of familial welfare, I spent the early afternoon compiling a digital dossier of screenshots, timestamps, and audio clips from the security feeds that painted a damning portrait of coordinated interference, the intruder's shadowy maneuvers now clearly linked to patterns matching Mike's vehicle and Rita's frequent visits to the notary. A web of deceptions that twisted the knife deeper when a final clue emerged in an overlooked email thread where Lisa had unwittingly CC'd me on logistics chats referencing scare tactics to soften my stance, revealing the headlights and alerts as deliberate psychological prods rather than random threats, a betrayal that crystallized the extent to which they had weaponized fear to dismantle my resolve without ever knocking politely at the door. Injecting a thread of humor into the brewing storm, I muttered to myself about staging my own low-rent detective agency in the basement, complete with string boards and pushpins mapping out their amateur schemes. The light vulgarity in dubbing them the family of fumbling felons, providing a fleeting chuckle amid the uncertainty that had me pacing the living room, debating whether to confront them head-on upon arrival or unleash a calculated counterstrike that would expose their machinations to the light of accountability, a dilemma that underscored the growing conflict where protecting my sanctuary risked severing the last threads of maternal connection, especially as Mom's unanswered voicemails piled up with increasingly desperate tones about needing us all together before it was too late. By noon, the first signs of their approach materialized with Mike's insistent texts demanding access in Mom's name, laced with accusations of my selfishness that only fueled the impending revenge I had meticulously orchestrated. Forwarding the dossier anonymously to her legitimate attorney and the county probate office with timestamps aligned to trigger an immediate review, while simultaneously alerting the neighborhood watch group about suspicious movers lacking permits in our zoning strict suburb, the timing engineered so that as the U-Haul finally lumbered into view around 2 o'clock, flanked by Mike's truck and Rita's car, a swarm of officials descended like summoned guardians, the real estate lawyer arriving with questions about the will's authenticity and code inspectors scrutinizing the truck's load for unpermitted hauls, Mike's face draining of color as he fumbled for explanations amid the barrage of legal inquiries that unraveled his fabricated narrative thread by thread. Watching from the window as Lisa gathered the kids in confusion and Rita slunk back toward her vehicle with averted eyes, the witty satisfaction bloomed in the irony of their own deceptions rebounding through bureaucratic precision. A clever exposure that humiliated without my direct involvement and restored a semblance of justice to the driveway-turned-battlefield, neighbors peering from porches with murmurs of support that validated my vigilance. Yet the triumph carried a hollow edge when Mom's call pierced the chaos moments later, her voice breaking over the speakerphone as she confessed to unwittingly signing off on Rita's suggestions during a vulnerable hospital visit, admitting the favoritism that had poisoned our dynamics for years and begging for forgiveness in a torrent of coughs and regrets that tugged at the guilt I'd armored against. Torn in that instant between unlocking the door to embrace the flawed family before me or holding the line that preserved my autonomy at the cost of potential healing, I chose the latter with a measured response that offered no promises of open arms, ending the call with a quiet assurance of her care but silence on reconciliation, the U-Haul reversing amid shouts of frustration as the officials dispersed with warnings and citations in hand, leaving the driveway cleared once more under the dispersing clouds. As twilight settled and the security app finally fell silent without fresh alerts, the house enveloped me in a profound quiet that amplified the lingering questions, pondering whether my series of revenges had mended the breaches or merely widened them into irreparable divides, if Mom's declining health would summon another wave of intrusions demanding compromise, and, ultimately, in fiercely guarding the boundaries of my world against those who should have cherished them, had I safeguarded my peace or condemned myself to an echoing solitude where family became the intruder that lingered longest in the shadows of unanswered what-ifs.